You're listening to Counselors on the Couch, an open conversation between counselors, coaches, and specialists discussing how people just like you can solve a multitude of challenges. Counselors on the Couch is hosted by Dr. Chuck Carrington. We invite you now to join us on the couch to listen in as Dr. Chuck and his specialist guests and experts candidly share insider information on how they help solve the problems that drive people into counseling.
So welcome back to Counselors on the Couch. I'm Dr. Chuck, and with me today, Dr. James Strickland has returned, but we have a new addition today. We have Jim Ahearn, which is Kathy's husband, and we've invited him to share some of his wisdom with us as Kathy permits. Jim, you want to go ahead and say hello?
Hello, how are you?
So Jim, you've been doing DivorceCare for quite a while too, I understand.
18 years.
18 years. And Kathy's 17 years, right? Mm-hmm. So you guys are veterans. Mm-hmm. All right. So today's topic is collateral damage. And when I say collateral damage, basically, I'm referring to anything that happens either to the individuals divorcing or to their family or to their friends or their lives in general. It's rather nonspecific. And the reason we want to talk about collateral damage is because so much happens through a divorce that maybe isn't factored in. And knowing about it either before, during, or even afterwards is important because it helps mitigate some of those damages. I think specifically of children when I think of collateral damage, but there's other areas. So before we dive into any one topic, I'm wondering amongst all the wisdom in the room collected, I hate to add up our ages. We would be like wise as God if we did that. But is there anything in particular that jumps to mind as far as collateral damage that may not be as common as, say, children jumping from house to house?
I think, collateral damage, actually, we talk about children so many times, but it extends to your entire family system. It extends to your friends, that the collateral damage, because they are a lot of times fond of both people. And in their cases, they are affected by the divorce. It may cause them sadness in that they can't see you together. But it also, in some ways, when they experience the divorce of a friend, it actually shakes their belief system and trust and may, affect them personally as far as their own relationship. Oh my gosh, this could happen to me. Oh,
yeah, that's huge. When your relationship is even a little bit wonky and you see your friends who you from the outside think have great marriages and they're falling, or your parents or close relatives, that can shake your faith in your own marriage. That's one I hadn't thought about as we were talking collateral just now. You, James, do you have any wisdom to share with us?
Well, collateral damage is a real thing. And think of it from the standpoint of like throwing a rock in a pond. The place where the rock impacts is going to be real damage, but the collateral damage is damage that you didn't count on. And it's the rings and the waves that, extend out from the primary point of contact or interaction that impacts people in ways that you can't imagine. And so we all have these multiple levels of relationships. Some of them are very close and very intimate. But as you go further and further out from the center, the rings become less intense, and you go to in-laws and you go to, other family members and you go to friends, and eventually it diminishes, right? But you don't live through this on your own. This is not just about you. This is about the community that you live in, whether you recognize that community or not. There are people who are associated with you, who look up to you, who admire you. For them, in many cases, it really causes them to go back and have to reevaluate their initial impression and opinion of you because they probably didn't know the truth of what was going on. And so they have to re-examine their belief structure and their system of interactions as well. I think that's really where the collateral damage comes from, is that people assumed one thing and then they're hit with the reality of something else, which forces them to have to go back and re-examine their whole belief structure around what their interaction with you or your spouse or your children were, and what they thought was solid and stable proves to not be so.
I think that what you just said about they're hit with a reality that they weren't expecting. As you're doing your ripples on a pond, when I was 19, I bought a little day sailor. I was not a good sailor, but I was practicing on a little tiny lake in the neighborhood. And then I took it out on a bigger lake that permitted powerboats. It was under 10 feet. It was a little boat. And me and my buddy were out there, used to be on a placid pond till the ski boats went by. And a little tiny boat didn't notice the waves until it hit. And the damage that was done, I mean, it overturned us every time. But we weren't expecting that. We had to re-script our entire reality. You can't take the little boat on the big pond. You're talking about people who are going about their business. They're not expecting to be overturned. And the person who's doing the speeding or the dropping into the water is looking in a unilateral direction. They're not even noticing often the damage in their wake. They're just plowing through life doing their thing. And those ripples, they don't seem to do a lot of damage until they hit something. When they hit something, it could be a major damage. And no one's anticipating it, I think is what you're saying, or at least not as intensely as they could experience it.
Yeah. And I mean, and from a military perspective, collateral damage is the unintended damage. You know, you drop a bomb on a house and you expect to blow the house up, but you didn't expect to, have destruction or damage to buildings 2 or 3 or 4 blocks away. You're at ground zero when you're going through the divorce. Okay. Mm-hmm. So all you're looking at is the big crater in your life and the smoking embers. It's very hard to have at least it was for me. It was very hard for me to have the capacity, the awareness, or the empathy to help others deal with their collateral damage because I had so much ground zero damage that I was just completely unaware of what others were going through. And I didn't have the capacity to deal with it because I barely had the capacity to deal with my own damage, much less somebody else's.
That's a good point. Mm-hmm. Kathy, you have any thoughts? I'm giving Jim time to think.
That is just so true. And because I can think back on the many years ago that it was for me. And the only focus that I had on that time was getting out of a situation that was killing me, essentially. And so the effect that it had on my children, as much as I love them, I probably wasn't as aware of the effect it had on my children. I wasn't aware of the effect that it had on my parents who, didn't know my kid's dad that well and had a certain opinion of him. So it is so very true. You are shell shocked. You don't know. And you're absolutely right, James, when you say you don't have the capacity at that time to even assess what the damage is that's going on around you. But it's important, I believe, for people to, if they're entering into a divorce, if they're just starting this process, so if it's been a while, to take a moment to just take your eyes off yourself and maybe look around you, set aside your pain, look around you as far as, what has been the effect on those closest to you.
Love to add your thoughts, Jim, if you have any on the topic.
Relationships is the word that comes to mind. And as these facts unfold, the people that your friends, that circle of acquaintances and family, as these facts become known, have relationships that are affected. And trust, understanding, all of those things get reevaluated. And it's not unusual to see people that you were close to then become distant. And so in that regard, your adult circle is rearranged, if you will. I'm of the opinion, though, that the biggest victims, casualties of the divorce process are the children of the marriage. And simply because where they had a unified picture, they now have a divided picture. And if I do mom, am I hurting dad? And if I do dad, am I hurting mom? And that is a tremendous weight to place on the children. And my experience is that regardless of the age at which the parents divorce, their children are affected, whether they're 10 or 30.
Absolutely. It doesn't matter the age of the children. The older children endure it better because they're cognitively able to think more about it. But the emotional baggage that divorcing parents brings to your family, is immense. I don't care how old you are. But for children, young children, we call it ambiguous loss.
Right.
It's not being able to understand how this is ever going to end, how it's ever going to close. And one of the signs of ambiguous loss that we see in children of divorce all the time is a tenacious desire to retain the status quo, to get mom and dad back together, even if it's a hostile, loud, obnoxious environment. The kids want their family intact, and they will cling to that.
Mm-hmm.
They also are very vulnerable to the concept of a divided loyalty.
Mm-hmm.
They cannot be overly loyal to one parent without robbing the other parent in their mind. And then when the divorce is finalized and other people come into the lives of their parents, whether it's a step parent or just dating, now they have to psychologically reject that new person because they're being disloyal to their other parent.
Mm-hmm.
And it becomes a very deep, very convoluted balancing act for the children, and they don't have a way to win it.
Mm-hmm.
So when people go into a divorce or they're in the process of one, if they aren't aware of their children's emotional needs, the woundedness, they're going to ignore them. And children, whether it's a death or a divorce or some other deep grief, they don't react or act the same way as adults. So we don't always recognize and sanction their expressions of grief. We don't see it.
Well, there's on the part of the parent. In my case, I had a daughter that went with mom, and I was told that she was afraid to live with me. And I didn't see her, didn't talk to her, and separation hearing with a judge coming up. And I wouldn't believe what I was told unless I heard it from her. And I wrestled with putting her on the stand. And what parent in their right mind is going to ask their child to choose between their mother and their father? I chose not to do that.
You asked a question, what parent in their right mind would ask their children to choose between a mother and a father? And I hate to say it, but in a divorce situation, it's more common than not. What you did was the noble thing that a good parent should do, and that is put their children first. But I'm sure you're not surprised 18 years after starting doing DivorceCare that some parents get very self-centered about their kids and they cause a lot of damage.
The point I want to make is that it was an enormously difficult turmoil decision to arrive at for me. And that was one of the collateral damage issues, if you will, having to make a decision about my child and having her to choose was not fair at all.
If parents had to pledge to first do no harm, it would be helpful, huh?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I'm working with a gentleman who is, well, he's about my age. He's around 60 something, and his daughter is in her 30s. And she is just now coming to grips with his choice that he was forced to make for her, that she never understood was a choice he had to make for her. She saw it as rejection.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just tearing him up for 20 years that she thinks he rejected her. He didn't, but she still believes it. And she's having to figure out what would it have been like to be him in the situation they were in. Because the mom was, I will use the children as weapons.
Mm-hmm.
And that unfortunately happens way too often in divorce.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, a divorce proceeding is supposed to occur in court, right? But before you ever get to the steps of the courthouse, you're fighting a huge battle in the court of public opinion.
Mm-hmm.
You are trying to plead your case to anyone who will listen, and even to some who won't listen at some point, because part of it is just processing out loud. Am I doing the right thing? Am I seeing this correctly? Am I, being able to rightly judge what's going on here? But the other part is that you're practicing for when you do have to go to court. And if I can convince you that the other person's wrong, well, then maybe I can convince a judge. But that just creates an enormous amount of damage in the wake. And I know that the noble thing to do would be, it's my pain, it's my suffering, I'll keep it to myself. But it's just so overwhelming, you just can't do it.
We're in a survival mode sometimes when we're going through this. That's exactly we've shifted down to where we're just trying to survive. And part of surviving is defending yourself, and you feel this need to defend yourself We're not thinking clearly a lot of the times because the emotions are so high in this, but we don't even realize where we're operating from. And there's a lot of panic. Oh my gosh, she's going to take my children away from me. Oh my gosh, he's going to take my children. Oh my gosh, I don't have a way to survive, to live. And so divorce can bring us down to our very base selves, because we're in a survival mode. And trying to think of others when you're in a survival mode is very difficult to do. But that's one of the reasons why it is so important when somebody is going through this situation to reach out and to get support and to get help from those who have gone this road before them, because of the fact that they can see things. They are now able to see things differently. And that's part of the healing process. As you heal, you begin to see things differently. But unfortunately, damage is already done sometimes, with the kids. If there's a pull, tug of war with the kids, the damage is already done. And then you have to go back and repair it, like the gentleman and the daughter you were speaking of. So it's like, well, so what do you do when you're in the midst? What do you do when you're in the midst of such pain? How do you even know? How can you even fathom or even think of taking care of somebody else? Because you're just surviving to take care of yourself.
Well, and I think that it's really important to be realistic here. These noble ideas are just that. They're noble ideas, but we live in a broken, fallen world, and everybody's got an issue, myself and everyone else included. And these issues come to the surface under stress, and they come to the surface under being attacked, and they come to the surface when you think that you don't know if you're going to survive through this and make it to the next day. And unfortunately, it brings out a lot of bad stuff in you. Mm-hmm. And it would be nice to be able to sit down and look at this and analyze it and really think before you speak and really think before you act. But when you're in the midst of the battle and you think you're going to not survive, it brings out a real primal character that is just part of all of us.
I had someone say something to me today that I told him it was a window of therapeutic opportunity. He coined it so well. He said, I was forced to talk about the one thing that I never talk about. And as you were saying that, James, I was thinking about that. We don't actually give voice to the fear that drives behavior. So, for instance, if you're worried that your children are going to be taken from you or your children are going to be used as pawns, what is the actual belief that's driving the reaction? Most parents are going to say, I want to have my parenting time. I have a right to see my kids. They have a right to see me. We need to divide this and make it equal. We need to make our children's lives stable. But what is the core fear when you're actually battling for custody? And I don't hear that in court. And I've been to court a lot of times in situations like this, but I don't hear in court what the core fear really is I'm terrified my child's going to stop loving me. And when you think that as a parent, you will do just about anything to prevent that. And then you wrap your logic around it. We're driven by our fears. We're driven by our feelings. And then we try to make it sound logical. Now, that's been my experience. I don't know about the rest of you. Jim's over there looking very wise, so I have to ask him.
When I started doing DivorceCare, one of the messages that I tried to relay to the folks that came to us was that we're called to do three things: love God, love your neighbor, and love yourself. And oh, by the way, if you don't do that, who do you answer to? In that regard, overcoming ignorance of things that we should be wise on or knowledgeable of and have that be the guide for our behavior are pieces that are missing from the picture. So when we got to the part about forgiveness and saying your ex is your neighbor and you're supposed to love your neighbor, and then I would say, let's say that part from the Our Father where it says, forgive us our trespasses as, and if you don't do that, what are you setting yourself up for? So what I'm doing is just putting some divine guidance on the table about how we as human beings are supposed to treat each other. And so I can concluded that love of neighbor was probably a very large area of opportunity for growth for just about every one of us. As I went further into the program and more years passed, family of origin emerged as a very large issue. And to the point that we were talking about here, when push comes to shove and it's a difficult situation, we fall back on those things that we're comfortable with. Well, that's the family of origin where you grew up. Were you equipped with love of God, love of neighbor, and love of self? Or were mom and dad there? Were all the lessons that should have been taught present so that a human being who has a healthy love of self is the person that is in front of me? Then we're dealing with a handicap. And so I have realized that there is an abundance of information, knowledge, help that's out there, and we're ignorant of it. We don't plug in. We don't choose to talk to friends. We don't go to places where the help is available so that the fabric of our families is not being torn apart because of successive generations. I had one woman come through that was third generation divorce. Actually, I've had two. And they thought that's the way it's supposed to be. Well, if you look at marriage and family, that's exactly the opposite view. And she acquired that where she grew up. So part of it is, where did you grow up?
And it's funny. Well, no, we talk about that. It's the family of origin. Yeah, that is what equips you, for how you're going to deal with things that come up in your life. And so it can be a family that's very dysfunctional. Then again, it can be a very loving family, which is what I grew up in, a very loving family. And my parents never fought. And I got out into the world and I'm like, oh my gosh. I had no clue that people would fight. I didn't know that women did the grocery shopping till I was a senior in high school. And a friend of mine's mother came home. I said, your mom does the grocery shopping? She goes, well, yeah, because my dad always did. But, I grew up. So when I got out into the world and started meeting people and trusting them coming from that environment. So it can be both ways as far as preparing you for the world. So it's not just about the love of growing up in a loving family or a healthy family. It is about equipping.
The Bible says to raise up a child in the way they should go,
right,
and they won't depart from it. And that's a double-edged comment, because if you raise them wrong, it's very hard for them to do right. If you raise them right, they're more likely to come back to it. You said family of origin. So if your family is healthy and loving and stable, that's your expectation. That's the basis of bonding and attachment in children. You will expect that. We get out into the real world and you, for whatever reason, become partnered with somebody who is not that way. And you're going to have quite an eye-opening experience, because your expectations are based on what you saw as a child. Mm-hmm. And the things in life that you see that don't fit that, you look at them as anomalies. Then you marry into one of those anomalies. And now you have to reconcile it. It's very difficult. Now, if you're raised in a family that's the opposite, where divorce is the historic way of managing conflict, and that happens quite often nowadays, then it's very difficult to see stability in somebody who is otherwise a stable, healthy person. You can't trust them. Basic trust requires that you first trust your parents, so you can trust your family, so you can trust yourself and the rest of the world. And, God forbid you trust God if your parents aren't trustworthy, because our God image comes from mom and dad image. So you can see where the family of origin does set people up in their relationships, their success or their failures. And when the failures come and the collateral damage comes, sometimes it blindsides people because they have no idea what's coming their way or what's going on, because they either were raised differently or they haven't stopped to actually encounter or consider. I've seen James over there with his thoughtful look on his face.
Well, I think the important thing is that you can listen to this podcast multiple times, and I could have listened to a similar thing. And there are people out there who've seen it. I mean, I first started DivorceCare with Kathy and Jim. They were the co-facilitators of the group that I went to. And they would tell me all this stuff, and I just couldn't see it. I could not even begin to wrap my head around it. I couldn't even begin to start to understand what they were trying to tell me, of what this was going to look like and what it was going to be like. And I don't know how you fix that problem. I just don't know how you teach someone what they don't know without walking through it themselves.
Well, in the examples that you gave for the two families, if it's the dysfunctional family and there's the me, what's at the center of that behavior? And I would submit that it's selfish, self-centered conduct. Whereas in the family that produces healthy, well-adjusted folks, it's self-sacrificing, where love is the key. And so love is given as opposed to taken. It's a matter of, am I focused on me or am I focused on the other?
And then you get into an unequally yoked relationship where one side's the taker and the other side's the sacrificer. Mm-hmm. And what's the sacrificer naturally going to want to do? They're going to want to appease and make it better and try to reach out to the other side and do all the sacrificing. And the selfish, the me first person is going to take that and take advantage of that. And that's their nature. That's how they were raised. Mm-hmm. They don't even recognize what they're doing is wrong. James was telling us a story once about the Queen sending her emissary.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if we've ever mentioned it on this podcast.
No, I don't think we have. So, and I've not been able to find a reference for this, and I don't remember where I heard it from. But supposedly that Queen Victoria was going to negotiate with Spain for the rights of Gibraltar. And her comment was, I'm going to send the most honest person I know, because those who are truly honest will recognize his honesty, and those who aren't honest will never be able to figure him out. I think a lot of times people in marriage, just that level of passing perceptions of each other. The giver gives and gives and gives and gives, and they give out of their surplus, but eventually they're just give out, which is a North Carolinian term that I learned as a child, where you just don't have anything else more to give. Mm-hmm. And the taker, the taker just takes and takes and takes and takes and takes, and then becomes frustrated and angry when there's nothing else left to take. And so you're left with this giant crater in the middle of what should be a marriage relationship, and there's just nothing left.
And in that picture, there's one key piece missing. That's God.
Mm.
Yeah.
And when you bring that up, Jim, what you had said a moment ago, James, about when you're in that situation, you hear people talking about their experiences and offering you things to give you hope and such like that. And you're going, I just can't see it. I just can't see it. So what can we say to somebody that's in that position? We can't make them believe that things will get better. So it really does take something on, if a person is going through this, it really does take a lot on their part. You know what it takes a lot of? It takes a lot of trust. And having that trust at this point in your life when your world's falling apart is really hard. And as Jim mentioned, God, this is huge in this, is very huge in the healing process, is renewing your trust in God that He is going to get you through this. You're not going to stay in this, but when you're in that position and you're a puddle on the floor and somebody's telling you, you're not going to be there forever, and you're going, yeah, right. I'm here. This is my life. I'm always going to be this puddle on the floor. So I can't answer the question, what was it that turned the corner, James, for you, in that when you were hearing these things and that you're just saying you couldn't see it, what turned the corner?
I think that it's getting to a point where you've lived with it long enough that you decide that you just don't want to live this way anymore. The pain becomes so intense, the dysfunction becomes so great that you have to choose to do something else differently. Mm-hmm. The initial shock of this is so significant that the first thing you do is, again, like a bomb going off, is say, okay, what body parts am I missing? Mm-hmm. Because it's so difficult to even begin to count the losses, and the losses just keep coming. But at some point, for me, it was, okay, this is my life. This is where I'm at. This is not going to get any better. I can't fix this. The only thing I can fix is myself. The only person I can control is myself. The only person who I can count on to truly love me is God.
Mm-hmm.
And from that, if God deems me worthy of love, then maybe I need to start looking at myself and deem myself worthy of love,
Mm-hmm.
and start learning how to love myself in a healthy way.
Bingo.
And start learning how to then be able to give to others out of my surplus instead of giving to others out of my need.
Mm-hmm.
That is, and I remember that day very, very, very clearly. You reach the bottom of the abyss. You've gone to ground zero. You can't go any deeper. You can't go any further. And the only way is up.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to decide that life as I knew it, life as I'd hoped it would be is over. It's now my life. And I'm the only person that can change it.
It's a choice.
It is a choice.
And I think that from my perspective, when you're in that mess, you don't think you have any choices. You think you're powerless against all these things that are going on around you. You don't realize that each and every person still does have that choice to.
Well, there's a lot of magical thinking that goes on.
Mm-hmm.
And by magical thinking, if I do this, and it'll have that impact on that other person. And for me, the magical thinking was all about, if I am able to do something like this, maybe that will have an impact on the divorce process or on my marriage or on my, at that point, soon to be ex-spouse. And you got to get through all that magical thinking, and get past that to be able to say, nope, the only person I can control is me.
Mm-hmm. That's always the key. We can never control somebody else. And when we think about how to manipulate another person, whether it's through our behavior or otherwise, we're thinking selfishly. Mm-hmm. You said earlier about fear, and you're talking about trust. Fear eats away trust. Mm-hmm. But trust doesn't just come back because fear is gone. Trust is always a gift, and you have to choose it. You have to give it away. People don't seem to understand that when you get to the bottom of that abyss, and it's a dark, dark place to be. It's kind of like back when they invented Prozac. It was supposed to save people from suicide. And people were put on who were despondent. And then the incidences of suicide started going up. They thought, oh my gosh, the drug is causing suicide. What they finally figured out was that the people that were putting on it had gone so far below the suicide line to the bottom of the abyss where they were just stunned and they couldn't even muster the strength to kill themselves. We're now making a slow climb back up, and they had to go through the suicide level again. So when James is describing being in the abyss and you make that choice, yes, you have to make the choice, and you have to decide, I'm going to love me and I'm going to be the person God called me to be, regardless of circumstances. You still have to climb up through all that slime and all those layers of nastiness again, because as you grow, you encounter one level after another of reality. But if you continue going up and you continue focusing on who was I created to be, not how can I bring that other person into alignment with what I want them to be, then your life changes. And that's the calling that God puts on all of us is who are we created to be? And how are we managing our lives? I think it was T.D. Jakes said, I'm not my sin. I'm the person who's managing, or I'm not my behavior. Let me get it right. I'm not my behavior. I'm the man who's managing my behavior. And it's understanding that your behavior and you are separate. Just like your spouse or soon to be ex-spouse's behavior and that person is separate. We have a hard time. We conflate them all together.
Love the sinner, hate the sin.
Love the sinner, hate the sin.
The tragedy of all of this is that, the Bible says that the man is supposed to be the head of the house, as Christ is the head of the church. And if you look at the definition of the Greek translation of the word head there, it's not mean be superior, be the boss. You're supposed to be the source of life for your spouse. There's a lot of positives to walking through this. There's a lot of positives to healing, but there's still the regret of, if I had done this sooner, if I knew then what I know now, would there have been a different outcome? And I don't know. I don't know the answer to that.
I don't know that you can know the answer to that. But you have two people in that contract.
Yeah. But if I would have been a source of life, instead of a source of condemnation and a source of shame and a source of anger and a source of pain and suffering, would the outcome have been different?
Well, I think that's a part of formation of the individual as they grow up. And for the human being to arrive fully at a maturity, there's two aspects that have to be developed. One is the human side, and the other is the divine side. Okay, we feed the body, we give it 3 squares, and we take it to the doctor when it's not sick, or when it's sick, and when so we're taking care of the physical side. Mentally, we get a high school diploma, or go off to college and get a degree or advanced degree or something like that, or we go into the workforce, and then there's on-the-job training and professional knowledge. So in both aspects, the physical and intellectual sides are being nourished. And if we don't nourish that regularly, is the full maturity achievable? Okay, well, let's take the divine side. That needs to be nourished regularly too. And that's where the guidance for how we're supposed to behave as human beings is found. And you look at today's culture, that divine side, that nourishment and development, that side is languishing way behind what's going on the human side. Jesus Christ, fully human, fully divine. And we have the same characteristics in us, just to a lesser degree, because we're hampered by original sin. And we ignore developing that spiritual side. Life is going to come at us, but we've got Jesus and God on our side. We're going to survive what comes, and we'll be more peaceful about it.
Well, you raise a good point. If you don't take care of your physical side, you're going to get sick. You're going to get hungry. You're going to feel the pain of that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. If you don't take care of your, for lack of a better term, intellectual side, it's going to impact your economic earning potential. It's going to impact your social status. You're going to feel the pain from that.
Right.
If you don't take care of the spiritual side, that part's easier to ignore. But when the pain comes,
I would offer that life is like a seesaw. Okay. On the one side is the emotional, that's the human. And on the other side is the spiritual, the divine. And I have found that the divine guidance, the spiritual side, is immensely effective at offsetting the emotional hurt that we encounter and experience. That's been my case. I found when I was stumped or being troubled by something, as long as I was plugged into something that had a spiritual or divine foundation, I found answers sooner rather than later.
One of you said a moment ago that people, I think it might have been you, Jim, or James, had said, I couldn't see it, what you're trying to show me. And I was watching Christmas show the other day. I know this isn't coming out right away, but it's Christmas last week. And my kids and I are watching, and the elf said, seeing isn't believing, believing is seeing. And it sounds so pat. And I started thinking about it. Well, that's what we're always talking about in faith.
Mm-hmm.
If faith is the essence of things unseen, we first have to activate our faith before we can see the fruits of the faith.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're dealing with something like a divorce and the conflict and the failure of a marriage and rescripting your life, you're seeing all this stuff, and you tend to base your belief on what you're seeing. It's hard to see another way out. You first have to give yourself over to believing a different story, a different reality than what is being thrust upon you. And that's hard. But when you start looking in faith at what you should be doing, who you are supposed to be, James and I talk about this all the time, about being versus doing. Mm-hmm. The doing, a human doing, is a very sad state of person. A human being is someone who has discovered what God created them to be, and they're out there living their life accordingly. And because it's the natural state, it's actually easier than the doing state. But most of us do because we're caught up in what we see, and we modify our belief to what we see. But using that, we can say, like in DivorceCare, if they see people who've gone through it and who've survived it and are thriving, they may not understand it yet, but at least they know it's possible. When I did foster care, they used to say back in the day that you could not reattach a child that was unattached. I don't believe that. That's what they used to teach us. My job was to show them love, put a little thumbprint of love on their heart because I'd only have them for a short time. And then in faith, they're going to look for that the rest of their lives. That was my faith. And that turns out to be true. If they experience love through someone else once, then they know it's possible. So demonstrating, like through DivorceCare and mentoring and coaching, all the different ways you can help somebody, if you live out the reality that you're preaching about, people will start to believe it, even if they don't see it in their life yet, because they see it in yours. I think that's the way we help each other.
One of the first things we tell people on the initial session is that you can't see what's ahead for you. You know, you're in a tunnel and there's a light at the end of the tunnel. It's not a train coming your way, but you can't see it from where you're sitting. Kathy and I have been there, done that, and we're here to tell you that there's better days ahead.
You can promise them that if they do their work.
Well, yes. I said, well, and we're going to put some information on the table that's intended to help you become healthy and whole as a human being. And it's up to you whether you take it or use it.
I'm not a big AA fan. Anyone who knows me knows that. But there's a reason I'm not a big AA fan. It's not the process that doesn't work. The people don't work the plan. And one of the major reasons it doesn't work is because they keep seeing people fail. But the people who are successful at it, they look to the people who are succeeding and they work the plan. And it's painful. It's the same idea here in divorce. You can continue fighting and being the problem, being the person who's trying to manipulate or adjust your spouse or use your children to protect your feelings or to try to get your own. You can be that person if you want, but the pain won't stop. And you'll continue to relapse like in AA. Or you can be the person who says, no, I'm going to look to those who are successful and take those lessons, take that information, like you just said, Jim, that's put in front of you and absorb it, use it, practice it, and become a success.
Most people stay. There are a handful that hear that and we don't see them a second time. But the ones that stay experience profound changes.
Well, how could they not? If they see it happening to other people, they're going to believe it. See, DivorceCare is not like a 12-step group.
Yeah.
No.
Totally different because instead of watching all your mentors fail, you're watching your mentors heal and move forward.
And one of the cool things about it is the fact that as they do this and we tell them, there's going to be a time where somebody's going to come into your life that you're going to be that person. You're going to be that example. But one of the things that happens as we go along is the fact that they start to help each other heal. And that in itself is so healing for them. Once they get into that role where they're reaching behind them and stretching out a hand to somebody else, it helps them on that. But is this still collateral damage?
Well, it's trying to manage it.
I know. Yes.
Collateral
it is.
damage, because collateral damage is the unknown.
Yeah.
And it's affecting everyone, and it affects the divorcees too.
Right.
But if you can't be healthy, you can't even be aware of or see what's happening to your children.
Right.
So you first have to be able to see it and accept it.
It's the taking, like on the plane, taking the oxygen first, and before you can help somebody else, you've got to help yourself.
We may end up breaking this into two sections just to get farther. But if you think about it, though, when you become right in yourself, you're right for your kids. Right. You're right for your friends, your extended family. You're right for your ex.
And that's what we tell the folks in DivorceCare. Here's him, here's her. Somewhere in the middle of that, in between that relationship, there's a line. And what we deal with is the stuff on your side of the line. We don't. So when they start talking about the other person, we say that's not going to help.
So when you go to court to settle a battle, because court, James said it a couple of weeks ago, it's an adversarial process.
Amen.
It's designed to be that way. It's not a place where you're going to get healing or even justice. It's a place to rip people apart from a contract that was never meant to be broken.
And take private life and make it public.
And external forces are deciding your fate. So when you get to court, you're going to be wounded. And I remember you quoted this to me once, James, about settle quickly.
Yes.
And I think that's good advice in collateral damage. If you can settle things without court, if you can come to agreements, and when you go to court, you're never going to get what you want anyway. Even if you win, something's going to be lost. Court is never 100%
on anybody's side, and it's seldom equitable. But the collateral damage, you win about custody, now your child loses a parent.
Mm-hmm.
You win about this holiday, now your child is forced to choose. You win about going out of state with your kid for a job because you want to be economically more sound, and your child now loses connection with everything he or she knew. Mm-hmm. Family, friends, school, neighborhood, the town, maybe even the culture. If you recognize all that in advance, this collateral damage, maybe you can settle more amicably before court.
Well, I love making movie quotes sometimes because I think they're I think they're so succinct. But you were sitting there talking and
a lot.
And I was thinking of the movie Fiddler on the Roof, and they're talking about something's happened, and as the good book says, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. And Tevier says, "Yeah, that's great. Now we'll all be blind and toothless." It's. There's no winning in some of these situations.
There's no winning. Rip people apart.
The only way to win is to heal, and to realize that the battle that you think you're having is not the real battle. The battle that you're really having is within yourself. The battle that you're really having is struggling with all your own hurts and all your own traumas and all your own dysfunctions.
And a lot of that is the culture that has, and where you grew up, and coming to realize that this guidance, that divine yardstick for our behavior, is something that's new that we're ignorant of, and you wrestle with those things, and they're hard.
Yeah, it's the old saying, we have met the enemy, and it is us.
We just did a marriage webinar, and we started off, we call it refriending. Because reconcile means to refriend, basically to make friendly again. It's actually, I guess, a more literal translation. So we based our webinar on marriages on becoming friends again. Mm-hmm. And we were talking about how what James was just saying, basically, it's understanding that they're not the enemy. We're the enemy. We have put ourselves in this place, and the culture has created this. I don't know if any of you are on social media. I don't do social media, but I do know that if you don't like what someone says, you can unfriend them. Mm-hmm. And so we started off our first week talking about we have become a culture of unfriending. Mm-hmm. And someone doesn't like something about someone else. They don't like a response. They don't like a comment. You post the wrong thing. You're for or against something that's, the new political flavor of the month, and you get unfriended. And that's carried over into marriages. Our culture tells us if you don't like your spouse any longer, you're not getting what you want in the moment from the spouse the way you want it in the moment, just get rid of them, get another one. Just swipe left or right or whatever that up or down, whatever they do on the dating apps. Mm-hmm. You just choose a new person. Mm-hmm.
The word covenant has been replaced by contract.
Exactly. Marriage has become a government contract rather than a spiritual covenant. Mm-hmm. And
well, the part of the problem is, and I see this with people who are going through divorce, and it was my issue as well, we all live in an echo chamber. We hear what we hear, and we hear it over and over and over again, to a point that regardless of whether or not it's accurate, regardless of whether or not it's truth, we accept it as such and we act on it.
Well, how is that possible, James? Why would we be in an echo chamber? Who thrust us in there? I'm being facetious.
No, I mean, it's through our own eyes. I mean, but it goes back to the point you were making earlier that, you don't like something someone says, just unfriend them. If you don't want to hear another side of an argument, just don't listen to that news broadcast. We've lost our search for truth in an effort to feel comfortable, self-righteous, and convenient.
We've immersed ourselves in comfort. Mm-hmm. One of the things I talk about in betrayal trauma, which a lot of people who are going through divorce feel the weight of betrayal. Betrayal trauma is a very real thing. We're talking about the difference between being safe and being comfortable. Mm. You have to be safe. Being uncomfortable is actually not a bad thing, because when you're safe and uncomfortable, you grow. When you're safe and comfortable, you become very complacent. Mm. Discomfort is not a bad thing. You need to be safe. It's a big difference. And people like to surround themselves with comfort, which means all of my friends should agree with me. In fact, I should be the smartest one in the room, which is why I don't like it when James comes in. We all know James.
We'll edit that part. We'll edit that part.
I get final control. I will not edit that out. James is one of the smartest people I know, and I know a lot.
You need to know a lot more people than
I know a lot of smart people. No, it's my point is we want to surround ourselves with what makes us comfortable, and when you're comfortable, you're not challenged to grow.
That's right.
How many people go to church on Sunday and they have their tradition and they have their way of doing something, but then 6 days a week, they don't do that very thing.
Or not even in the parking lot.
Not even in the parking lot. They're comfortable doing it in church in their methodology. But God forbid that they take that out and live it out in their politics or their work world or their family world or their friend world. I could name a lot of things that are going on right now in the world that is anti-Christian.
So you're saying the culture is going against the divine guidance.
The culture is, by definition, against God because the culture is fallen and God asks us to do something different. So we do get caught in that. We are human beings that get caught in our culture. But we are called to be introspective, to be wise, to conform our mind to the mind of Christ, to take our thoughts captive. And we have a great owner's manual that if we follow it, I know for most people it's aspirational. We can't ever do all of it. But if we aspire to do as much as we can, we're going to have a better life. And that includes, even if we do, as Christ himself said, if we have hard hearts and we have to be granted a divorce, even if that happens, we can live beyond the divorce and become the person, the being that we're called to be.
Well, there are two gospels that talk about that divorce. One of them, though, has a comma after answering the question as why Moses permitted divorce. And hardness of heart is the answer in both cases. However, the one with a comma after it says, but in the beginning, it wasn't so.
Exactly.
So I attribute that to the garden before the fall, where self-sacrifice as opposed to selfish was the key for human behavior.
Oh, I agree. But we're talking about what the heart of collateral damage really is. It's selfishness. When we start doing what we think is good for us, we wound other people. And I think James was talking about doing the right thing for others. And it's hard to do the right thing. Sometimes we sacrifice too much. But there's never a downside to doing the right thing ultimately. So yes, maybe you have to not see your child as much as you want, or maybe you have to permit things to get into their lives through your ex's, poor choices of whatever. Maybe you don't have ultimate control, but if you believe that God is on the throne, it's going to come somehow to fruition. He's going to make it all turn out okay.
Yes.
And just like my client whose daughter is in her 30s and he's in his 60s, I think, he's reconciling it now. But in the last 6 months, he's seen movement in him and his daughter both that wasn't there 6 months ago. Because he's a Christian and she's discovering the importance of God in her life. And so now they're seeing through different lenses. Right? God will make even the evil that people intend for us, he'll turn it to good. For those who what? Love God.
Love one another as I have loved you. And the realization of as how he has loved me is the key. And I would suggest that the vast majority of us are not at all secure in that. The love of God is unconditional. It comes to us. There's nothing I can do to make God love me more or cause God to love me less. And that's the bedrock. If I don't have that as the non-negotiable part of the foundation of my behavior, then I'm not playing with a full deck of cards.
So how would you extend that? There's nothing I can do to make God love me more or less. How would you take that and extend it to applying to other people when you're in the midst of a contentious divorce? Any thoughts?
Yes. Is the word that I just said or the deed that I just performed draw me closer to God or not?
That's yeah. Like you said, that's what's key. There is we sit there and we think that our actions will bring us closer to God. We think that our actions will affect His love for us, but what our actions do sometimes is make it harder for us to believe in that love. So His love is there surrounding us, but we just can't believe it. We can't soak it in. So that's one of the hardest things to do is to...
Let me be a little bit more specific in what I say or what I do to my neighbor, that other person in front of me, that that child. Am I being a vessel through which the love of God is being shown to that person? It's either yes or no.
How can you be loving towards somebody who's ripped your heart out and done all these things to you? Sometimes in that case, being loving is simply stopping and stepping back and not saying what you want to say. Sometimes that's the best you can do for being loving in that moment.
Yeah, I got to believe boundaries come into this somewhere.
Boundaries come into,
absolutely.
But also one of the key things, honestly, to becoming loving towards this person that has hurt you so much is to make the decision to pray for that person. Not that they go drive off the edge of a cliff.
Yeah, I remember that from one of the DivorceCare. What she's referring to, there was a DivorceCare video. Said, they asked this little boy from Tennessee, do you pray for your spouse? Oh, yeah, I pray she get bit by a rabid dog. I pray she get that her car goes out of control and she runs off the bridge. I don't think that's the kind of prayer that we're talking about.
No, that's not the kind of prayer. Wait, I will pray that the ambulance comes in time.
Yeah, that's right. He did
still
say
not
that.
worthy.
But still not worthy. But honestly, one of the healing processes as far as you carry this hurt and you carry this anger, and this will go into the forgiveness part when we get to that for another person. How can you love this person who has hurt you so much? How can you love this person who has done wrong to your children? How can you? You can't. You don't probably in that moment have the strength or have the thing, but God has it. So therefore you do. You take them in prayer to God. You start praying for them. And as you pray for them, over time, the prayers will change. You get away from the cliff thing, but the prayers will change to where you may say, dear Lord, I ask you to bring, soften the heart of my children's father. And you eventually, as you pray for this person that has hurt you so much, there's a healing that takes place in you. It's a very gradual thing, but it's a healing that takes place in you so that you can honestly pray for this person.
You could pray, God, give my children the father you want them to have.
Yes.
In the one that they already have.
Yes.
Change him. But you don't have to do the changing. You have to believe God will do it.
Yes.
Being a counselor, sometimes we counselors, we try very hard to never put our opinion on people, and we never try to force them into a corner because it's usually counterproductive, even if we know they're dead wrong. But there's something I learned from my mentor years ago that I use periodically. He called it, when he said, periodically you have to use the power of the therapist. And I said, what do you mean by that, Merrill? He says, simple. Ask your clients this: what do you love more about the fight you're having than your child? Ooh. Or what is it that you love about fighting more than you love about your marriage? Or what is it you love more about this conflict than you love about the person sitting in the room with you? Because it comes to the heart of the issue, which is what Jim is talking about. And that is the state of your soul and your being in connection with God and others. If you're just wrapped up in your selfishness, then you aren't even aware of what you're doing to other people. But if you are loving yourself properly, which is how God loves us, if you see yourself through the eyes of God, loving yourself the way he calls you to be loved, which is healthy self-esteem. It's a healthy narcissism, self-love. Then you can love others because that's what's going to emanate from you. Mm-hmm. But when you're attacking or refuting or otherwise reacting to other people, you're not focused on God or on love for yourself. You're focused on winning, and that's pride, that's sin. Mm-hmm. We talk about this being versus doing all the time, and how the only way you can be is if you first come to a real understanding of who you are in the eyes of God. You have to love yourself in a healthy way. Once you get there, it's easy. So in James's, I shouldn't say it's easy because I don't live his life, but when he's running rescue, he's told me some stories about when there's people there and you go through the motions, you have to do what you got to do. There's a job to do. because I've asked him, how does he deal with it? Because I couldn't do it. There's so much tragedy. He's seen things that I would quit if I had to see these things. And he says, well, I'm just being as present as I can. I'm just doing what I believe God would have me do. And that's the key. It's being present. Mm-hmm. If you think about the mission of Christ, his mission is reconciliation, right? He's reconciling us to God, but how did he do it? God could have done a lot of different things. So how did he choose to do it? He chose it by becoming present with us. Mm-hmm. Well, he was very grounded in who he was.
Well, and I think that's a really good point. I've been sitting here and trying to think about the best way to describe this. And I've lived both ways in my life. I've lived in a way where I really didn't like myself and tried to control others around me. And it's a simple concept of, if you trigger me, then that's my issue because I'm the one that got triggered. And being controlling versus not being a controlling kind of person. Comparing that to, just being and being responsible for myself, being responsible for my boundaries, controlling myself. And I can tell you the latter is a lot easier to live than the former. And the former feels like the tail wagging the dog instead of the dog wagging the tail. Yeah. And it just takes an enormous amount of energy.
You said trigger. And we talked about triggers before. When you say you triggered me, it gives you an excuse to behave badly. But when you say I was triggered, now you have to look at yourself and say, well, what's going on in me? Mm-hmm. We get to control our triggers, but we'd rather take it out on the person who created that trigger in the moment. Mm. Triggers belong to the person being triggered. And I deal with a lot of folks that, there's a lot of reconciliation going on in a lot of lives. And, well, he's triggering me. He's triggering me. Well, she's triggering me. No. You're being triggered by their behavior, but you own the trigger because you get to control it. So if you love yourself enough and you understand the piece that comes with that, the being the human being instead of the human doing, even if you do get triggered, you own the trigger. You get to control that, which means you can love on that person, even if they're being totally stupid, because it doesn't matter, because you can love on them because they're not taking anything from you when you're a human being.
Forgive them, Lord, for they know not what they do.
Exactly. And how many spouses are running around out there right now in the midst of divorce saying, I want them to have the best in life. They're saying, I don't want them to take anything from me. That's what they focus on.
That's the same person that's saying, my happiness.
My happiness. Me too. Me first. Mm-hmm. If Jesus went me first, we wouldn't all be here talking about him right now because he didn't have to go through what he went through.
I'm amazed at the number of people that come to us that are hearing, I'm not happy. And they're pointing the finger at the person that I'm talking to. Mm-hmm. And these folks need to look in the mirror.
Mm-hmm. They won't be happy if they change spouses.
Amen.
Because they're taking themselves with them.
Yep, exactly. I think it's Gary Smalley that talks about the happiness meter. And if you gauge your happiness in marriage by glancing at the happiness meter, it's only full about 10% of the time. Most of the time it's in the middle. Sometimes it's almost empty. But if it's not full, you're going to say, I'm not happy.
Yeah, but the point that I hear is that person's happiness and lack thereof is being blamed on the person that's here.
There's no such thing as happiness in marriage as a goal anyway. It's the outcome.
Joy is what the scripture uses for the word.
Happiness is selfish. Mm-hmm. Because it's an in-the-moment assessment of your state based on how people are treating you or what you're receiving. But let's talk about some of the forms of collateral damage you've seen. We talked about kids, obviously. Yeah. What else is out there? I mean,
collateral
you get your
damage
friends in a divorce?
Yes, I just say sometimes you lose your dogs, you lose your pet, you lose your home. Collateral damage. You lose your financial security.
That's a big one for most women.
Yeah, you lose financial security.
You lose your in-laws.
That's right.
And if you've been married a long time, that's like ripping half your family away if you like your in-laws.
Right.
Well, but even if, regardless of whether you like them or not, these are people that you've had very close relationships, for the most part, consistent relationships with, mm-hmm. for, in some cases, decades. Mm-hmm. And now you're supposed to pretend they don't exist anymore?
Yeah.
You lose identity. Mm-hmm. People around you don't know how to treat you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I did research.
You have to take out the garbage.
Yeah, that's one I'm still not over. Oh. I hate taking out the garbage. So I had to do it before, but I don't have the kids around anymore to blame it on. A research project I did way back when I was in grad school was on non-custodial parents, specifically fathers of divorce, and how the loss of identity created deep levels of depression. And most men won't go to counseling. Men don't like counseling. They don't like emotions to begin with. They're kind of like Vulcans. So they just push it all down, and then they stop visiting the kids because they don't want the conflict, or they don't want to be called a visitor, or this is my parenting time. No, they lose I'm not a dad anymore. I'm a visitor. I'm not a custodial parent. So collateral damage extends to definitions, friendships, the dog. Yeah, I know a lot of people fight over the dogs.
Dad and the kids is huge. And the example, one of the sociological statistics that's out there, mom goes to church, 10% of the kids will follow. If dad goes to church, it's 40%. I came across some information recently that said if dad disappears from the picture, the ability of the child to mature and have a relationship with God the Father is significantly handicapped. My dad died when I was 10, and amen.
Well, all the research into God image points directly to the parents. And because fathers and mothers have such a different way of approaching parenting, we can't get a holistic view of God without a mother and a father.
Yeah. Well, when mom and dad were in a picture, the meter for emotions was right in the middle. When dad died, mom got a blow she wasn't ready for. It went over and stayed on the peg, and it never came off. But I can remember bringing home a D on a report card when I was in the second grade, and having a conversation behind a closed door about academics. And I don't remember any of the specifics. I just remember coming out of that conversation and very clearly thinking, this guy wants my best interest and he loves me.
Fathers are unique, and most children go with the mother. And in our current culture, unfortunately, children are seen as property to a lot of the moms. And this is my child. You're taking my child. No one ever says the guy's taking her child. I'm sorry, the mom's taking his child. There's a discrimination in our culture. Children belong to the mom. But I know from many clients that the mom is not necessarily the better parent. She's just a different parent. And the children need both.
Yeah.
And so the children grow up with a hole. And they're going to seek to fill that hole with something. And the ambiguity that comes from divorce with children is probably the greatest pain that we inflict on our culture at large. We have so many children who have had their stability, their structure, their faith in marriage, their faith in God, their faith in themselves ripped away because of divorce. And it's rampant. And it's just as high, if not higher, in the Christian culture as it is in the secular culture. And second divorce, I forget the statistic, you had it the other day, was it 75% or so of second marriages fail?
Yeah.
Which is just unbelievable. It's easy to understand.
And then something like
and it's 80, and it's higher for third marriage.
I think it's like 85% of third marriages fail.
If you once you have crossed a taboo barrier, and for most people, marriage, you don't go into marriage thinking you're going to get out. Some people have that culture. But if once you cross the taboo of divorce, it's easy to cross it again. It's like any other taboo. Because you no longer are afraid of. I was terrified of divorcing. That's what kept me in my marriage for so long. I didn't want to go through all the costs it was going to. And I didn't even know all of them. Just what I read. I didn't want to go through that. I didn't want my kids to go through that. And even though my youngest son was 16 when my wife and I divorced, it was still hard on them. And they were applauding the divorce, but it was still hard on them. And it's hard on them today because they have family is split. And unlike when I divorced her, I used to say it was all her fault. Now I have to think about, no, it wasn't. It's my fault too, which is really hard because my pride, is in the way.
But now there's no way. I don't think I've ever witnessed a split of a family where there wasn't damage done somewhere.
My oldest son, he was out for Christmas he didn't say it specifically, but I was listening carefully to what he was saying. He's turning 30, and he has he's flirting. He has love interests he says they don't reciprocate. But he said, I guess my standards are too high. I'm too picky. I think he's afraid to get married because he's seen what a bad marriage could look like.
Yeah. And I think that talking about collateral damage, beyond us, ripples as far as society goes. If you look at today's cultures, as far as marriages, there's more couples living together, purchasing houses, having children, even without marriage.
What does that say?
What did that say 50 years ago?
50 years ago, it said a completely different thing. What?
Well, wasn't it frowned on by the culture?
Oh, yeah, it was frowned on by the culture. The culture itself frowned on it. But, I look at these facts. A marriage does not hold the same ideals as it did like when I was growing up. When you got married, you married for life, regardless of circumstances. You were married for life. And so marriage isn't necessary as in relationships a lot of times these days. They may be living a marriage relationship, but it's not, it has lost its value.
They're living the shadow of a marriage.
Yeah.
But they're not married.
No, because if they're just living together, they still have, they are living there with that out. Mm-hmm. The out is always there. If you get married, a lot of them think the out is not there anymore.
In neurolinguistic programming, they used to tell us that when someone says, I'll try, that we had to get them to say, I will. Because if someone says they'll try, they've already created a psychological out.
Yoda, there is no try, either do or do not.
Right. Try is you're already hedging your bet.
Yep.
And when you're not married, you're living together, we're taking a test run on marriage. Mm-hmm. Let's get our house, let's get our careers, let's get our kids, and then we'll see if that works, and then we'll get married. Well, it's the marriage when it's healthy that holds all that together. Mm-hmm. So now they're creating collateral damage, and they don't even know it before the marriage even exists, because now they're changing culture, and they're destabilizing family, and they're causing their children harm. When I was a kid, if I had moved in with a girlfriend, which I wouldn't have, my parents wouldn't have applauded that or even told anybody. One girl got pregnant when I was in high school out of wedlock, and nobody said it out loud. We all knew it, but we all pretended. And the pastor had them get married. And the girl's mother didn't talk about anything, but when the baby came, she talked about, we have a baby, but she didn't talk about how that baby came about. It was just not spoken. Nowadays, kids say, I'm moving in with so-and-so, and their parents say, yeah, my kid's girlfriend or boyfriend, they just set up house and they're buying a house. We're so proud of them. What happened in 50 years?
Oh, and yeah, I could go on and on about it. Yeah.
But talk about collateral damage, because now you have no way to protect yourself when you do split up.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And the children don't even know who their parents are. Or there might be, I don't want to get too far off, but when you don't value marriage, you have children with multiple parents, mm-hmm. and you can have lots of halves and steps. Mm-hmm. And when you end up with a family like that, now the children don't know what to think about marriage and themselves, because there's no belonging anymore.
There's that home of origin. What mm-hmm. the heck is the home of origin? The home of origin is this huge melting pot.
Yeah, you're no longer in family systems theory. We say it's our rituals mm-hmm. and our family that defines who we are. Mm-hmm. Well, when I have my son's best friend, he has, I think, 30 plus brothers and sisters technically, and about 13 stepmoms.
Wow!
And he always jokes. He says, "I don't have a family tree. I just have a family bush." But you think about it, where's his identity? Mm-hmm. We draw our identity through our family.
Mm-hmm.
Well, one of the points that they make in matrimony is that it's a three-person God, the bride, and the groom. And when that is entered into, the bride and groom have an opportunity to grow spiritually that doesn't exist outside matrimony, because they are supporting, giving and receiving of each other. So the intimacy level grows. And as the relationship with God matures in there, then greater intimacy is possible. And if we are not fully engaged in that, then we're denying that opportunity for growth and relationship with our spouse that are strong and sound.
We're off topic, I know, but that you said that. One of the things I've been telling couples that are in trouble right now is I ask them, have you prayed with your spouse? Well, we pray. Well, no, have you prayed with your spouse in a real, not just a canned prayer or a praying at them type of prayer? Have you sat down in your living room, you and your spouse and Christ, 3 chairs, and just had a conversation?
Yeah.
Most of them don't know what praying with their spouse is really all about. And I have to confess, when I was married, I didn't pray with my spouse. We just did not have the same conception of how to pray even. Mm-hmm. When spouses start praying in an honest relational way with God, something happens. Intimacy becomes something that is so deep. Mm-hmm. And everybody is afraid in their marriages they don't have intimacy. I'm not connected. I'm not in love anymore. It's because they don't have intimacy. Well, there is a level of intimacy that comes with a Christian marriage that you can't get anywhere else.
Mm-hmm. And love, this is a definition I came across in the past year, but it's sincerely willing the good of the other for the good of the other and expecting nothing in return. And that's self-sacrificing love.
Wasn't that a definition of God?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But that's the whole point. And I don't think we have a good understanding of that as a culture.
Yeah, I don't think very many people, Christians that get married, how many Christians that get married? I can speak from the Catholic perspective is when you get married, yes, we do have pre-Cana and things like that where you're supposed to prepare for it. But how much is it emphasized that the importance of praying together as a couple, of having God in that relationship? It's not really there. And how many people don't think about it? People just don't think about that. But boy, one thing that comes to mind is if you have God in the marriage with you, boy, does that take a lot of pressure off.
The idea of collateral damage, I think, is that we don't recognize the harm that we're doing or the harm that we're sanctioning, even harm that we're participating in, that we're not aware of it because we haven't prefaced our lives with the right thing to begin with. Mm-hmm. And so I think the way that if we're going to help people get past this risk of collateral damage, we have to help them understand what it is that they're actually asking to do in this divorce or mm-hmm. after a divorce. What have they set in motion that they have the power to undo?
Yeah. What can a person do to minimize? If you're going to go through a divorce, sometimes there's situations that this is what has to happen. What can you? It'd almost be good to have like a course in how do you minimize the damage? You have to go through this. What can you do so that the damage is reduced or some of the damage doesn't happen? I think when we're going through divorce, we're not thinking about damaging other people and other things around us. You're thinking about
getting out of pain.
We want to get out of pain.
But if you have an awareness of what's happening, at least you can minimize it, hopefully. Mm-hmm. I think it begins with awareness. And I think the only way we can get people there is to be honest and say, it's not about you. Mm-hmm. Yes, you're in pain, and yes, you may have to get out of it, but it's not just you. A divorce is a cultural affront. Mm-hmm. Starts with your family and your marriage, and it goes on and ripples out from there. Words of wisdom before we part, Dr. James?
I was, again, to use another analogy, I was sitting there, I was thinking, only about 10% of the bombs that were dropped on target in World War II actually hit the target. The other 90% created enormous collateral damage. Mm. But weaponologists over time have invented smart bombs, laser-guided bombs, a way to pinpoint where you want the damage to occur to minimize collateral damage. That requires an enormous amount of intelligence, an enormous amount of technology. I think in listening to all of this, and I don't know that we have all the answers because everybody's situation is very specific. But I think as you're walking through this, the whole purpose of this podcast is to be aware of the unintended consequences that come from your actions, to be aware of all the collateral damage that you're creating as you go through this. And you need to be really smart about it. You need to try to the best of your ability to minimize this extraneous damage that can occur, that you can create, because at some point you're going to have to go back and try to fix all that stuff. And it's just more on the debt side of the ledger that's going to put you further in the hole in relationships with others, in relationships with God, and in a relationship with yourself. It's so important as you go through this to try to do it with honor and integrity. Because if you can look at yourself in the mirror and say that I maintain my honor and I maintain my integrity, at least you're not creating additional unnecessary collateral damage for yourself and for others. But if you go in there like a bull in a china store, you're going to have a lot of mess that's going to take you potentially the rest of your life to clean up.
I think the simplest way to put it is Stephen Covey says, just think win-win. In divorce, it's often the case we forget that the people that we pledge to love are going to lose if we seek just to win. We are going to force other people into losing. If we put everybody on an equal plane and say, we're all going to try to make the least amount of loss possible.
Yeah, because a divorce is not about winning.
There's never a win.
There's no winning. There's just degrees of losing.
But if you can think win-win, at least you're not thinking win-lose. And that's the point. Because in an adversarial process, what do? It's win-lose. And that's how it's set up. The courts are set up to pick the winners and losers. Because we have given our marriages over to the courts. God doesn't want it that way.
Let no man put asunder.
That's right. But yet we voluntarily do that. Well, I appreciate y'all. We might have to hit some more collateral damage topics as we go on, but I think that this was a really valuable dialogue. I hope that speaking to someone, our prayer before was to let God speak. So I have to believe that somewhere, somehow, someone's going to hear this and say, that's what I needed to hear. Yeah. So that's what we're here for. So I appreciate it. Next week, I don't know what's on the topic next week. This is our 7th of 12. So we're just moving through them. Next week is New Year's. So I hope you all have a happy New Year's.
That's right. We won't see you till next year.
That's right. And I know, it's going to really deprive you of my presence. I know that's really hard, but we were watching was it you, John? We were watching a TV show and the guy says, welcome to my presence. I'm going to start greeting my clients that way. Well, God bless you all. We'll see you back next week.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Counselors on the Couch is brought to you by Virginia Beach Christian Counseling, specialists in family counseling, grief, trauma, and loss. Find us at www.virginiabeachchristiancounseling.com. Counselors on the Couch is produced and directed by John Bell, executive producer Dr. Chuck Carrington, with original music score and mastering by John Tyler Music. The opinions expressed here are of the host and the individual guests and are not necessarily the opinion of Virginia Beach Christian Counseling. If you would like to make a comment or would like to ask to be a guest, please go to counselorsonthecouch.com.